Hello, welcome to another virtual program with Maine Historical Society. It is August 19th, 2021. I'm Kathleen Newman, and this is our program on the Know Nothings with Matthew Jude Barker. Matthew is a lifelong resident of Greater Portland. He has been a genealogist and historical researcher since 1981. Since 1996, Matt has been the author of Maine history articles, writing for Portland Magazine, Galway Roots, Discover Maine, and The Mainer. He was a contributing writer to several books, including The Western Cemetery Project, They Changed Their Sky, The Irish in Maine, and John Ford in Fawkes. Matt is the author of The Irish of Portland, Maine, A History of Forest City Hibernians. He is working on a major history of the Portland Irish during the Civil War era. He is also the writer of the Maine Irish Heritage Trail. Matt is the resident historian and genealogist at the Maine Irish Heritage Center. He received a 40 Under 40 award from the Irish Echo, a major Irish American newspaper. Matt, thank you so much for being here with us this evening.
Oh, thank you very much, Kathleen. And thanks everybody at the Maine Historical Society and everybody that's joined tonight on this stormy night. At least we didn't have to venture out from our homes tonight.
That's right. We can stay dry and cozy while we learn some history.
Right, exactly. Yeah, so this is a great opportunity. Thank you again. And a perfect slide to start out with. On a night kind of like this in the middle of October 1854, Father John Baptist had returned to Ellsworth, Maine, where he had been pastor. And he was visited an Irish Catholic family called the Kents. And word got out that he was in town, and a mob of men went to the Kent house and demanded they release Father Baptist from his house, from their house. And they would not do that. So they broke in, they found Father Baptist, and they dragged him into the woods where they stripped him and applied hot tar and feathers, and then they dragged him around town on a wooden rail, and then left him for dead on a wharf in Ellsworth. Some had even wanted to burn him alive or to hang him from their tree. Now the reports of the attack on Father Baptist are very varied, especially in the newspapers of the day. And I've read many books and articles about it, and they're all a little different in the facts. But he was tarred and feathered, and he did almost die. Then they stole his money and his wallet and his watch. And this was, the night of October 14th, 1854, which was one of the worst of the incidents of the Know Nothings. And the Know Nothings were originally a secret political party in the United States. And they were especially popular in New England and New York and even in California. And they gained a lot of political power in 1854, 1855. They originally were formed as the Order of the Star-Spangled Banner in 1849 in New York. But they were just one of many groups that were formed in the 1830s, 1840s, and 1850s, and again later on in the century, that were against immigrants, especially Irish Catholic immigrants, and in Maine, French and Irish Catholic immigrants. The fear and prejudice of Catholics goes back to the colonial days, of course, with the colonial wars in the late 1600s through the 1750s, when the England and France continued their battles and wars, and which of course carried over to North America. And one thing that was really abhorrent to the Portland, the Ellsworth people, was that Father Baptist was a Jesuit priest, and the Jesuits were the ones that were blamed for everything in the colonial days, the Society of Jesus. And that they said they had instigated all the rebellions and uprisings of the Native Americans joined with the French in colonial days. Kathleen? Okay. I hope everyone can see me. I'm not seeing myself, so I'm not sure how this is going, but
We can still see you, Matt. You're doing
okay.
fine.
Yeah, I'm not used to not seeing the, at any rate, sorry, yeah. In the 1700s, the priests were outlawed in Massachusetts, which Maine was a part of course, until 1820. And the Irish Catholics were called St. Patrick's Vermin. In the 1750s and 60s, especially, they had Pope's Night, or Pope Night, which was actually Guy Fawkes Night in England. And they would carry around effigy of the Pope in the Devil and then burn them. And this was very popular in Boston and in Portland, well, Falmouth at the time, according to the journals of one of the local Protestant ministers. And the Catholic Church represented everything that was bad anywhere and everywhere. The Catholic Church was called the Whore of Babylon, the man of sin, the man of perdition. And they believed that the Pope was the Antichrist, and that this was all laid out and predicted in the book of Revelation in the New Testament. During the Revolution, the French helped us in the Revolution. So George Washington said this Pope's Day or Pope's Night is ridiculous tradition. And, they needed the help of the French Catholics, so that the nativism and the anti-Catholicism became less extent at the time. And but by the 1820s, immigration from Ireland really increased, and for the next 100 years, immigration was steady from Ireland from 1820s to 1920s, and then of course, and later in the century, all the other immigrant groups that came, and then in the 1840s and 50s, German Protestants, German Catholics came in great numbers to America. So, and this coincided with the Second Great Awakening of the Protestant evangelical revival that had engendered prohibition, abolition, women's rights, prison reform, and religious reform. But they also added, nativism, as we call it today, as historians call it today. They were against immigrants, especially Irish Catholic immigrants. Samuel F.B. Morse, the inventor of the telegraph, and he was a rabid nativist. He gave many anti-Catholic lectures all over the country, and he helped to instigate a lot of this at the time. And at one point he wrote, "Up, up, I beseech you, awake to your post. Let the tocsin sound from Maine to Louisiana. Fight to protect the vulnerable places of your Constitution and laws. Place your guards, shut your gates." Soon after that, the Ursuline Convent in Charlestown, Massachusetts was burned to the ground. But that's another story for another day. But that was instigated by the Reverend Lyman Beecher, who the father of Harry Beecher Stowe. He was another very rabid anti-Catholic and anti-foreigner. In Maine, the first incident we can find, or one of the first, and one of the most disgraceful, was in 1835, the summer of 1835, when Irish immigrants living and working in a community outside of Orono in Stillwater were attacked by the local Yankees. There was a fight, as usual, broke out between an Irishman and a Yankee, which instigated and escalated matters. So then on September 1st, they put up handbills, which was kind of like the internet of the day, posted up all over the place, directing the rioters to an island where the Irish lived. About 200 men then proceeded to the scene of the neighborhood and destroyed the Irish houses. The men, women, children fled into the night into the woods. The next day, the concerned citizens met and adopted resolutions saying that this could never happen again in their town. The Bangor newspaper at the time expressed outrage, saying, "We sincerely trust we shall not again have to record the perpetration of similar disturbances in this section of the country." Unfortunately, that was just the beginning. They would have to report on many more attacks in Maine in the next 2 decades, including one in their own town at the time, where seamen and fishermen attacked an Irish grocery store and eventually destroyed many Irish homes. And again, the Irish fled into the woods. In 1844, a Portland newspaper wrote in no uncertain terms what exactly nativists believed. They said that it was a high time, quote, it was a high time that check were put to the impudence of foreigners. The workhouses and pest holes of Europe boil over, and the scum is driven to the shores of America. Must we receive such materials into our arms to be stung and destroyed by them? Many American citizens have become so much incensed at the course pursued by foreigners that they have resolved never to give them employment. And this was a year before the start of the Great Hunger, the Irish Potato Famine of 1845 to 1851, when over 1 million Irish died and then 2 million immigrated. The Democratic newspaper, the Eastern Argus, was quite upset with the bigotry at the time, and they wrote it was the monstrous offspring of religious bigotry and political hate, and was nourished into some local vigor by the fostering oars of the Whig Party. The very republic whose foundations were laid by refugees from old world oppression, they would have to shut its gates and deny its privilege to all who, like their fathers, preferring freedom to tyranny, might wish to exchange a monarchy under which they were born for an American home and Republican institutions. The only asylum of free opinions and religious toleration on earth, they would have converted into an abode of bigotry and nursery of intolerance. Fortunately for America, and happily for the victims of despotism everywhere, their attempt has failed, and the many meditated treason has been rebuked and crushed, if only it had been. At this time, the Native American Party is formed, not to be confused with the Native Americans and the Indians. And they called their party the Native American Party in 1845, and it spread throughout the country. We had a party here in Portland. So this all led to 1849, and then finally in 1851, when the Know Nothings really became organized and started their crusade. They had newspapers, they had street preachers that went around the country. A couple of them include John Sayers Orr, who was called the Archangel Gabriel, and Ned Buntline, who became famous as who wrote the first stories about Buffalo Bill Cody. They were two of the rabble rousers who came to Maine in the 1850s, and a lot of chaos and commotion was directed at immigrants due to people just like these street preachers, as they were called. Ellsworth became a real hotbed, as did Portland, of anti-Catholicism in 1854 and 1855. In Portland, Father John O'Donnell found it's not safe to walk at streets at night, and reported it that his church, St. Dominic's Church, which is now the Maine Irish Heritage Center on State Street, was attacked, windows broken, hospital was spared on the doors, front doors staved in, and the kids would throw rocks at him, hiss at him, and swear at him. So he went to the city mayor of Portland at the time, who placed a night guard at the church every night and it was many of the Portland papers and Boston Pilot at the time called Portland a veritable hotbed of anti-Catholicism, where the Protestants at one point believed that the Irish maids would poison their employers at night, in the middle of the night, either in an uprising, followed by an uprising in the middle of the night, that the Irish maids would poison their tea, which was very, of course, very popular with the ladies of the time, not just the Yankee ladies, but of course Irish at the time started to enjoy the tea too. So they were actually scared that the Irish maids would poison them. Father John O'Donnell went to bat for the Irish. He wrote many articles to the State of Maine newspaper, and which was picked up by the Boston Pilot, the Catholic newspaper of Boston, which was read by Irish households throughout New England and the United States. And he informed people of how bad the bigotry was here in Portland. But he was never physically attacked, like what happened to John Baptist. John Baptist, who was was a Swiss Jesuit who was escaping the Civil War in Switzerland, came to Maine. He was ill-fitted for it. He did not want to be a missionary, let alone a missionary to Native Americans. His English was broken, and but he did learn the Penobscot quality languages of the Abenaki language, and he stayed from 1848 till 1855 in Eastport and Ellsworth. He officially became made Ellsworth his home in 1851. In the three previous years, he had also been all the way to Waterville and Skowhegan, where the local Yankees enjoyed him, but believe it or not, because he had converted a lot of the Irish and French to the temperance crusade, and they even asked if they could help build a Catholic church for the Catholics of that area. They realized that Catholic Church, unlike some other people, that the Catholic Church would bring order and stability to these foreign people that others called foreign riffraff in the scum of Europe. But Father Baptist inserted himself into whether the Catholic school children should be excused from reading the Protestant King James Bible, or the King James Version of the Bible, which they believed was a heresy. They wanted to read the Roman Catholic version. So this blew up into a big political and social issue that was picked up by William Cheney, a know-nothing, one of the leaders of the know-nothings in Ellsworth, who attacked the Catholics in his newspaper, which is today is now known as the Ellsworth American, which was originally the Ellsworth Herald. His prejudice and denouncements of the Catholics, and the Protestant sympathizers, who we call Jack Catholics, who did not believe in his ongoing attack on immigrants, he stirred up a lot of the hate mongering. He put in his newspaper an ad that said, 1,000 men wanted. To Protestant laborers everywhere, we say, come to Ellsworth and come quickly, for your services may yet be needed in more ways than one. And that was a clarion call out to other know-nothings in the country. And a lot of them did come here indirectly. So he was one of the greatest agitators of the know-nothings in Maine, William H. Cheney. Lawrence Donohue's daughter, Bridget, Lawrence Donahue brought a case against the Ellsworth School Committee and asked that his daughter Bridget be allowed to read the Catholic version of the Bible, which they refused. So he brought them to went all the way to the Maine Supreme Court, where he sued the Ellsworth School Committee. Now, this is a long, complicated case that I can't get into, except to say that he lost his case, and that this just intensified the hatred, which led to, eventually to Father Baptist being removed to Bangor by his bishop, Archbishop Fitzpatrick of Boston, and then he did come back in the middle at night, to visit on his way to Cherryfield, Maine, and that's when he was attacked and tarred and feathered. It was right about the same time, or actually, a few months before that, the Catholics in Bath, Maine, the Irish Catholics in Bath, Maine, had rented a church, the old Second South, the old Protestant church, which we see in this slide here, the first phase burn of the old South Church. And they burned it to the ground. And an artist named Codman had painted 3 versions of this. We see a first phase and then the second phase. Could you move ahead, Kathleen? And there was the 3rd phase of the burning. And you can see, a lot of the townspeople just watching as it burned, and other folks, American flag and everything. And this happened 3 times in Maine in 1854, 1855. 3 Catholic churches were burned to the ground in Bath, Lewiston, and Ellsworth. That was just some of the tragedies that occurred, I should say, you could say, that were caused by the know-nothings. The know-nothings finally died out soon after 1855 due to many things, including the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which permitted the extension of slavery into the Western American territories. So they were very split on the issue of slavery, which between that and their violent actions in their overzealous actions everywhere in the country, they split apart. A great many of the know-nothings then joined the Republican Party, which was forming at the time. And so they fractured over this. But this was not, of course, the end of the know-nothings. And by the way, their name was anything, most of you probably know, when anybody asked them anything about their political party, they said, "I know nothing," hence the name Know Nothings. But they were just the most prominent and visible of the anti-foreigner, anti-Catholic, anti-immigrant groups in the United States in the mid-1800s. They died away by the time, completely died away by the Civil War, time of the Civil War. There was a small resurgence in the 1870s of the Know-Nothings. And again, in the 1890s with the American Protective Association. Kathleen, could you move ahead? This is just an example of a couple that we happen to have from the Maine Historical Society of Michael and Annie Meehan Daly. They believe this was might be their wedding photograph in 1869. So this shows a perfect example of what Irish immigrants looked like at the time. And can you move forward? And back to Father O'Donnell, he was from County Donegal, born about 1818. And this was him at the age of 32, I believe. You can see he's got premature gray hair. He ended up becoming a pastor in Dover, New Hampshire. And he was and many years after he left Portland, he often came back and he was still loved by the local Catholics. They never forgot his defense of them during the Know Nothing troubles. Could you move forward? And this is Gorham's Corner, which is where he had spent many of his days, Father O'Donnell. This is the Irish community, one of the Irish communities of Portland that include Munjoy Hill in the West End near St. Dominic's. Gorham's Corner was set up by the Irish beginning as early as 1823, mostly Yankee at the time. They eventually was all Irish. By the late 1840s, Gorham's Corner had become all Irish and remained Irish until the 1950s, even 1960s, although a lot of other groups of people, of course, moved in there. There's almost nothing left of Gorham's Corner today. But this was just an example of an Irish neighborhood at the time. And let's see, could you move forward? This is one of the things that the Know Nothings did not want the Irish to have was any type of political clout. They didn't even want them to vote. They wanted to take the naturalization, the right to be naturalized. They wanted to move it from 5 years for an immigrant, which meant you had to wait 5 years to be naturalized, to petition the court to be naturalized. They wanted to move that from 5 years to eventually 21 years. So meaning you'd have to be in the country for 21 years to be naturalized, which of course a lot of Irish, because of poverty and disease, had long passed away after 21 years in America. So this was just one step that the Know Nothings took to stop the Irish from voting, because you had to be a naturalized citizen, of course, to be a voter. Michael Daly became successful Irishman in Portland. This is his actual copy of his naturalization certificate from 1868. This is a little different than what we see like on ancestry.com. People look up no matter where they came from, their ancestors' naturalization record. Usually all we see is a petition and a notation with when they were naturalized and where and what court they were naturalized in. But this was an actual certificate that the Daly family had passed down in their family for over, of course, 100 years when it was donated to the Maine Historical Society, thank God. I'm not sure what time we have for time.
You're doing fine, Matthew.
Okay.
You got plenty of time.
Let's see. Yes. So as I said, the Know Nothings, of course, never completely died away. mean, the name died away, the political party died away in the mid 1850s, but that type of group, as we know, has continued right up till this very day, unfortunately, with every new wave of immigrants that have come to America, no matter from what country or what religion. In the 1890s, it was American Protective Association who burned, attacked and burned churches again in the country. They, according to legend, and I've not been able to prove it or find any evidence of it, but I've heard it from so many different people. We've heard it from so many families. When they were building the St. Dominic's, second St. Dominic's Church between 1888 and 1892 in Portland, the Know Nothings or the APA or whoever at the time, threatened to burn the church down. So big Irish longshoremen, big brawny guys, they got it with baseball bats at night. Again, I have no actual evidence of that, except that that's the legend heard by so many people. And the APA did not particularly target the Irish as much as they targeted the Polish, the Jewish, the Italians, the Eastern Europeans, and all of the other groups that poured into the country at the turn of the century. That some Irish, a lot of Irish had become established and even wealthy by that time, of course. So they were focusing on that. By the 1920s, the KKK, which some people don't realize, was very popular in Maine and New England. And it's not because they were going after African Americans or blacks, or not even Jews, as much as they were going after Catholics, French, Italian, German, Irish Catholics. And then here in Portland, as we know, they changed the government system. The city government was completely overhauled to get Catholics off the city council and the city aldermen, and a few of the few Jews that were on the city council. And so they got rid of the board of aldermen and they got rid of the elected mayor. And we didn't have another elected mayor until about 10 years ago when Michael Brennan became mayor, the son of Irish immigrants, or grandson of Irish immigrants. So the KKK was very strong here, as many of us know, and they had headquarters in Portland, and they did burn crosses here in Portland. So of course the racism and bigotry, and especially against immigrants and people of other religions, has been here since the beginning, since the 1600s, and unfortunately no sign of letting up in this country. But we go on, and it's a type of cancer in American culture, the history, where it has resurfaced. Just when you think it's gone, it resurfaces again. It raises its ugly head, usually in a time of political financial crisis in our history. With that being said, I could go on about the Know Nothings. It's a very complicated and long-running history, and I have a lot more about it in my book, my Civil War book. I'm trying to wrap up and be out before the end of the year. So I have a whole chapter devoted to the Know Nothings and that whole era and all the different outrages that happened against immigrants at the time. And not to say the immigrants were, of course, the immigrants weren't perfect. We know, the Irish and other immigrants did face a lot of poverty and disease and, all kinds of social ills that they had to overcome. So it's not, but of course, a lot of those were exaggerated and embellished in the news of the day, which thank God that doesn't, we don't see that today in a regular paper, daily newspaper, but anyways.
Thank you so much, Matt. That was really informative. And I should have mentioned at the beginning of the talk that this is a history that's explored in our exhibit Begin Again, Reckoning with Intolerance in Maine, and that this talk is one of a series exploring the histories and the themes and the stories explored in that exhibit. If you haven't had a chance to see that exhibit yet, we would encourage everyone to come to Maine Historical Society and see it, or you can visit our website, mainehistory.org, and see digital versions of the exhibit, one that is 2D and one that is 3D. We have some questions from the audience, Matt. First question, do you know if Neil Dow was a leader of the Know Nothings, or what was his involvement in that?
Neil Dow was a second degree, according to my research and other people's research, he was a second degree member. So he was high up in the Know Nothings. And he was friends with the Reverend Benjamin Peck, who was a Baptist clergyman and one of the leaders of Know Nothings Portland. Portland had their own twig or lodge. Yes, he was quite high up. And J.B. Thorndike, president of the Maine Charitable Mechanics Association, was also one of the leaders of the leader of the Know Nothings in Portland in 1854. Yeah.
Can you explain again what that phrase "know nothing" means? Why the party, where that nickname came from?
Well, they were called the Order of the Star Spangled Banner. Then they became the Native American Party, and then they were known officially as the American Party during the mid 1800s. But when anybody asked them anything about their society or their political party, they said, "I know nothing." So at first it was a nickname that they didn't like, but then they took to it, and there was Know Nothings. They used that name in all kinds of different avenues and venues.
Did they? So you've talked a lot tonight about Know Nothing, how anti-Irish Catholic they were. What about French Canadians?
Yes, yeah. I mean, in northern Maine, from Ellsworth all the way up to Eastport, that the Catholics that they were against were, of course, Irish immigrants, but also French Acadians and French Canadians and Native Americans who were almost all Catholic themselves. I mean, so they were against the Irish, French, and German Catholic immigrants. They were, here on the East Coast of Maine, the first wave of immigrants were Irish, so they were the first to take the brunt of the anti-Catholicism, followed by the French and the Germans, Italian, throughout the rest of the 1800s.
Another audience member is saying, you mentioned the clergyman Lyman Beecher and his prejudice against Irish immigrants. Is this inconsistent with his being a family that they were considered prominent leaders in the abolitionist movement?
Yeah.
Was it is this a prejudice that's based primarily on religion? Because I think
primarily on religion, yes, because and that was unfortunately one reason Irish immigrants did not like, including a lot of Irish American leaders did not like. In Ireland, there was a lot like Daniel Connell, who was one of the biggest Irish leaders of the 1800s. He was for abolition, but in the United States, because of abolitionists were so often anti-Catholic, the Irish did not like abolitionists because they said that they can help the black man, but they hate us. They hate the Catholics. They hate the Irish immigrants. So yeah, it's one of those ironic things in history.
Yeah, the two don't really seem to jive.
Yeah, they didn't like. They were saving the
but anti-immigrant, or
they were anti-slavery. They were helping the slaves, of course, but which was great, obviously. But they really hated Catholics. I mean, and obviously because they were mostly Irish Catholics at the time.
Related to that question, how many of the attacks do you think are based on real religious opposition versus perceived economic fears?
Well, that's very tough to answer because every case could be different. I'll tell you that a lot of these perceived economic conditions were anything but. The Irish were filling a void, as Charles Scontris said, the eminent labor historian who passed away recently. He said that the immigrants were filling a void in the labor supply. So they weren't taking the everyday man's job. They were filling a void, that they were doing the jobs from ditch digger to domestic maid that the Yankees, the Protestants, the local, regular everyday people did not want to do. So they weren't. It was not. It was perceived economics,
Mhm.
but it was also that, like today, they said that the Irish were taking their jobs, and they were also filling up the poorhouses and the jails. But if they were filling up the poorhouses and not, and they weren't working, then how could they also be taking your jobs but not working at the same time?
Both those things can't be true. Yeah.
Right. They can't be taking your jobs and not working. So it's so that's why it's so complicated. I mean, a lot of it is just they were born and it's in their DNA. It was in their DNA for generation after generation after generation to hate anything to do with Catholicism. So naturally, the first scapegoats were the Irish. Well, and depending on what part of the country too. In other parts, it
Sure.
was more French or Spanish or.
Let's see. Um, so
Um,
when the Know Nothings would do something like burning those churches, like the church in Bath, is this something? Can you speak to how a lot of the townspeople, maybe people that aren't necessarily Know Nothings, they're just Joe and Jane citizen, are
yeah, I mean, they weren't all like official know nothings. I mean, but they would join in, with I hate to say the fun, to them, well, I mean, the, 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 the burning of the church in Bath, Maine was brought on by a street preacher named Brown,
Mhm.
who for 2 days after the 4th of July in 1854 had gathered a large crowd, a lot of whom were drunk, and they were still celebrating the 4th of July, and he was preaching, anti-Catholicism, anti-immigrant. So, so some for a stupid reason, which usually, unfortunately happens with these things, they escalate for stupid reasons. It's too late. A carriage drove through the crowd, and they thought that that carriage was trying to prevent him from hearing this street preacher named Brown. So someone yelled, "Adjourn to the Old South," which is the old Protestant church that was
Mhm.
being leased by the Catholics. So they all, like a couple of hundred went to the old former Congregationalist church, where they set fire to it, while the townsfolk watched it burn to the ground. Um, Oliver Moses, a Yankee, that I should say that a lot of Yankees were very helpful to the Irish, and Oliver Moses, a local Yankee, stopped them from burning a home which he owned and an Irish family lived in behind the church. I mean, of course, that was his property, but they were on their way. They were going to keep going. They burned down the church, and they wanted to burn the next building. I mean, and what happened in Bangor in 1830s is that they destroyed the Irish homes and businesses, but then they started attacking wealthy established families. So that's when they finally stopped them. They called out the militia. Um, and I mean, these street preachers did a lot of the damage, instigated a lot of it.
Mhm.
They would go to town. They came to Portland. They went all up and down Maine, all up and down all around New England, New York, all over the country. So they would come to town, and they were, um, they're rabble rousers, hate
Yeah.
mongers,
Yeah.
scaremongers, fearmongers. I see someone's asking about a governor.
Yeah, Governor Brewster, can you speak to his
I don't know much about him, except that there's still, from what I've read, that there's still a debate whether he was actually a know nothing. I mean, a member of the KKK, or he just took their money. He took their support. You know, um,
Do
he
you
took
know
their
of
votes.
any, do you know of any other governors someone's out
Well,
have sympathies to the Know Nothings or?
in the early 1850s, Anson P. Morrill, he was said to be a know nothing. He was backed by the Know Nothing, and I apparently had promised the Know Nothings different things. And this was at the time that Neil Dow was elected mayor again in Portland. And again, there's still debate whether this Anson Morrill was a Know Nothing himself. I mean, I don't have enough information myself. I don't know enough about it. But they certainly thought he was a know-nothing. But when he became a governor, he enacted laws. He did not go along with their reforms. You know, they did not go. He did not go along with what they wanted him to do. And you know, in Massachusetts, some know-nothings governments, they did have some reforms that were good, you know, but their main focus was against, you know, the immigrant and the foreigner, the Catholic, I should say, immigrant, especially.
Do you know, someone was asking if you could recommend a book about the Ku Klux Klan. I know that at Maine Historical Society, we carry a book called Not a Catholic Nation. The Ku Klux Klan Confronts New England in the 1920s. That's by Mark Paul Richard. Do you know of any other
No, I do not. I have a lot more books I've read a lot more, and I have a lot more books on the Protestant Crusaders that, you know, called it the 1800s, you know, not the KKK of the 1920s. I wouldn't know. I don't know enough about the KKK in, you know, in Maine.
Sure. I'm just going to drop the link to that book in the chat. Again, it's called Not a Catholic Nation. I'm just looking through some of the other questions. Do you know what role, if any, the organized Catholic groups like the Hibernians and the Knights of Columbus play? I guess just asking, you know, what kind of role did they play in the community? I suppose groups like that.
Well, the ancient of Hibernians were formed in New York City in 1830s to protect priests and churches from being attacked and burned. Here, but they weren't formed in Maine or in Portland until 1872. So it, you know, almost 20 years after the heyday of the Know Nothings. But they were formed as a as I said, originally formed to protect the churches and the priests and the people from attacks. But of course, they became a mutual help society. They helped, you know, members, you know, they'd pay a dues, and then, you know, you'd get, if you got sick and you couldn't work, you would get you know, X amount of money until you could go back to work. Or if you died, your widow would get, you know, $50, like in 1880s, like the Longshoremen Society. They would get in like $50 for a funeral. You know, the widow would get $50 towards a funeral and expenses. So it was a mutual aid society, and then of course, you know, Knights of Columbus were the same. So yeah, I mean, obviously, a lot of these members would have been around even in the 1890s with the APA, and the same with the in the 1920s with the KKK. In fact, it's interesting that the Hibernians died out in Portland after the 1930s, after the heyday of KKK, you know, and all the other hate groups at the time. So, yeah.
Can you elaborate at all on how the Kansas-Nebraska Act split the Know Nothings on the issue of slavery?
Because some of them were far it. I mean, some wanted the slavery extended to the Western territories, and some were, you know, abolitionists, or at least against the extension of slavery. So that just like so they split. So and not only that, yeah. So the northern Know Nothing split from the southern Know Nothing, just like at the time, the Baptists, the churches in the 1850s split. You know, so it became the Northern Baptists versus the Southern Baptists. There were two separate entities before the Civil War, even before the Civil War, because of slavery. Obviously, you know, the Southern Baptists were, you know, as a rule, were for slavery, and Northern Baptists became abolitionists. So they completely split. So the Know Nothings completely split. And the Know Nothings and farmer Whigs and farm Democrats got together and formed, of course, the Republican Party at the, you know, in mid 1850s.
Matt, tell us a little bit more about the Irish Heritage Center.
Well, the Irish Heritage Center, for those that are not familiar, is the old St. Dominic's Church, which was closed in 1998. And we've had and in 2002 became the Maine Irish Heritage Center, and we have events there, and we've had you know, it's kind of the hub of Irish groups in Maine. And on every Friday we have a genealogist there from 10 to 2 or by appointment.
Mhm.
I'm one of the genealogists, and we have a great database of obituaries that are accessible online, and also genealogy database. And you go to the website and the Facebook page, you can learn a lot more about the Irish Heritage Center. We have several book talks coming up, including one by Professor Michael Conley in a couple of weeks, a new book that he had just come out,
Mhm.
and one by Bridget Connolly from Wisconsin, Minnesota, who wrote about her Irish immigrants who were part of the Irish immigration scheme from Connemara to Wisconsin in 1880.
And tell us a little bit more about the new book that's coming out, or that you hope to have out by the end of the year.
Well, it started out just being 4 years, and I thought, well, I can do 4 years. That'll be, I can handle, but they started doing more of the background leading up to the Civil War. So it's supposed to be just about the Civil War and the Irish in Portland area. But then the more I wrote about the antebellum period leading up to the war, I said, well, I might as well do the whole era. So from 1845 to about 1870. So that would include the Great Hunger, the Irish Potato Famine, abolition, the Know Nothings, Prohibition and Neil Dow, the Panic of 1857, the coming of the railroads, and coming of the steamers into Portland, steamships, and then of course the Civil War, and then the Fenians, the Irish rebel group here in Portland, were formed all over the country, and the Great Fire of 1866. So it became it's become a lot
A much bigger, yeah.
bigger project. That's like almost too big. Just covering those 25 years.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah. And I see, I'm trying to read some of these questions too. It's like,
yeah, it's okay. Another question. Southern Baptists formed in 1845 over a debate on Texas entering the Union. Maybe if that's a debate probably too about should Texas.
Yes, that whole thing was a big debate about directly and indirectly about slavery too.
Mm-hmm.
And that, it's so complicated. There's so much went on in that era that, then they had the Mexican-American War, where a lot of people like Abraham Lincoln were, against the war. I mean, he supported our troops, but he thought that it was, what's his name? The president at the time, in my mind just went blank. I think, James P. Polk. They called it Mr. Polk's War. That he moved the map, he moved the line between Mexico. So he instigated war. He wanted a war with Mexico. We shouldn't have been there in Mexico, which, some things never change.
Yeah.
Sadly. So and so that, between the War of Mexico and slavery and immigration and Know Nothings and the industrial age, and the coming in the railroads and all that was what combustible. It was I guess you say a ticking time bomb.
Sure.
It led to all kinds of turmoil, of every kind of description of turmoil between the late 1840s and, of course, 1861.
Sure. So you mentioned the fire of 1866 in Portland, which for a lot of us is a familiar story. But one audience member is saying, I'm new to Maine. Did that affect Irish neighborhoods? Was it set on purpose? Can you give the audience a little background on the 1860s?
Yeah, well, it was started by to the best of everyone's knowledge, by a boy playing with firecrackers on Commercial Street, who threw some into, or they ended up
On the 4th of July.
on the
right?
4th. Yeah,
Yes.
all right.
Mhm.
Yes, on the 4th of July, 1866, and it was supposed to be one of the biggest celebrations of the time, because it was the 90th anniversary of America,
Mhm.
birthday, 90th birthday of America. And so they had all kinds of things planned, but supposedly he was playing with fireworks, firecrackers, and some of them went into a woodshed on Commercial Street, and it spread directly across the street into the Irish neighborhoods at Gorham's Corner and John Bundy Brown's sugar house, which was full of molasses, which burned for weeks and weeks and weeks afterwards. And so the fire went from Center Street and, from Commercial Street, Center Street, all the way over to Exchange Street and all the way up to Munjoy Hill. So it wiped out a lot of the Irish neighborhood, a lot of Irish neighborhoods, and it wiped out the merchant district of Exchange Street, the post office. There was a lot of lawyers and doctors and a lot of newspaper offices on Exchange Street at the time. So it wiped out a lot of the business district of Portland, and then it wiped out the Irish and Black neighborhoods on the bottom of Munjoy Hill, like the Bite, which was on Hancock Street, under the near the cemetery, Eastern Cemetery, and a lot of Irish, 10,000 people were displaced. And a lot of them ended up in the tent city, as they called it, on the slopes of Munjoy Hill. And there was a lot of Irish families that lived in tent city until they could rebuild. And it was the biggest fire of its kind in America until that time.
Yeah.
I mean, you could tell more about it.
Yeah, I mean, this was a pretty significant and incredibly devastating event that has really impacted in a lot of ways the way that Portland looks now. There's only I think 3 18th century buildings on the peninsula that survive, and a lot of what you see today in Portland is post 1866 fire, and a lot of the building materials, the layout of the city, meant to help prevent something like that from ever happening again.
And they brought the water from Sebago Lake. That's when they
That's right. Yeah. So it's 4th of July. The weather, as I understand it, was kind of a recipe for disaster, like a dry, windy 4th of July. And there was no really ready fresh water source in town. So it's after 1866 that the city of Portland starts piping in water from Sebago Lake, and it starts to become available in private homes too after that.
Yeah, and one of the contractors was an Irish immigrant from County Galway, Bernard Daly, whose grandson was a great-grandson was a famous book dealer here in Portland, Francis O'Brien. And Bonnie Daly was a contractor and undertaker, and it was fascinating to find articles from 1868 where he was awarded a lot of the contract to build the pipeline from Sebago to Portland.
Oh, interesting.
1868.
Well, thank you so much, Matt. This is a really informative and interesting talk. We're looking forward to the new book later this year. And thank you again to our audience for being here. Remember, you can learn more when you visit our exhibit, Begin Again. You can do research of your own through Maine Historical Society, whether it's through our online database, Maine Memory Network at mainmemory.net. That's where the images in Matt's slideshow this evening all came from Maine Memory Network. If you'd like to do research in our library in person, visit our website, mainhistory.org. Right now, research opportunities in the library are by appointment only, and you can learn how to do that and make your appointment on the website. So thank you, everyone, and thank you again, Matt, for the presentation.
Yes, thank you, Kathleen. Thanks, Maine Historical Society. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in.